Walt Secord is Director of Public Affairs at the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Walt, thanks for your time. I want to start with the rise in anti-Semitism that we're seeing around the world, sadly on our own shores as well. And I saw the Anti-Defamation Commissioner today warning some kids are not wearing their uniforms to school at the moment.
Absolutely. It's a very tough time, and it's been a tough 3 weeks. And I can tell you that everyone in the Jewish community in Australia, the 100,000, has a family member or knows someone in Israel who's been touched. And layered upon that has been a rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. Now, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, there's a person there who does research, Julie Nathan, and she's reported that there's been a significant spike in the last 3 weeks. And she's been monitoring trends for the last 10 years. But I can tell you anecdotally, those stories are true. I do know family members that are having discussions about children wearing their school uniforms, people tucking their Stars of David inside their shirt, and people making really, really tough decisions. Outside of most Jewish homes, there's a little bar. It's called a mezuzah, and it's a parchment which tells you of your obligations to God. And there have been reports of people removing the mezuzah from their doors. So it's a tough time, and you also have to remember that the Australian Jewish community has the highest percentage of Holocaust survivors outside of Israel. So when anti-Semitism spikes and rears its ugly, nasty head, Australian Jews feel it strongly and feel it personally. But on the positive side, the community is pulling together and supporting each other and showing a great warmth and love to everyone in the community.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me, knowing how tight-knit it is. But do you also, amid the anti-Semitism, Walt, is there a sense of the support and love from the rest of the Australian community that would not countenance such racism and appalling attitudes? As we saw last night from Chris Minns, an impressive speech the Premier gave at the Sydney Institute, where he spoke strongly in favour of Israel's right to defend itself and against hate speech. Is there that sense of support being felt as well? I hope so, Walt.
Absolutely. There is a recognition. Last night at the Sydney Institute, Chris Minns' speech, a condemnation of anti-Semitism, but also a belief and strength and a commitment to community harmony. But also the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, condemning anti-Semitism. And then the former Prime Ministers coming out and doing a joint statement. Yes, the Jewish community welcomes those gestures and those statements. And remember, language matters. And when you hear a person who occupies the highest office in the country and in the state giving you support, communities welcome that. Now
to focus on the events in the Middle East, the Jabalia refugee camp that was hit. It's called a refugee camp, but these were structures that had been built up over time. Israel said it targeted and took out a Hamas leader. There was a lot of many other lives lost. This is a diabolical scenario for Israel, on the one hand trying to wipe out Hamas in one of the most densely populated strips of land on earth, and yet facing more and more scrutiny from the international community, urging them to avoid civilian deaths. It is a very difficult path to walk for the Israeli military and the Israeli authorities.
Absolutely, Kieran. I'm glad you recognize that. Israel is in a situation where a war that it did not start. This war was started by Hamas. And Israel has to knock out Hamas targets. And Hamas embeds themselves in hospitals and in camps and in mosques. And they're committing a war crime when they use their own citizens as a human shield. Now, Israel has to respond. Now, tell me any other military in the world, any other country in the world that does leaflets, phone messages, and warnings to civilians before they hit a target. Now, that's the situation we're in. Israel does everything it possibly can to reduce civilian targets. Now, the numbers coming out, please be careful on the numbers. We knew from the Gaza hospital earlier in this conflict that the numbers that originally occurred were 500, and then it was walked back. and then it was down to 50, and it turned out that the hospital itself wasn't attacked, it was a car park. So again, let's be careful on the early data and the early information that comes out.
It's taken a couple of weeks, but the Israeli Prime Minister has spoken to Prime Minister Albanese. I know our PM did speak with the Israeli President last week as well, but do you welcome the fact that they've had those one-to-one talks as leader of our nation to leader of Israel?
Absolutely welcome that. Anthony Albanese has been strong from the very beginning, and I also know that Foreign Minister Penny Wong has been speaking to her Israeli counterpart. So again, it's important. Australia is a middle-ranking power, and it's important that the Western world sees that Australia supports Israel. Now, the United States, Israel, but they also worry about the views of Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. So when I heard that Anthony Albanese had spoken to the Israeli Prime Minister, I welcome that. In fact, the news of it was first reported in Israel in the Hebrew press.
Walt Secord from AIJAC will stay in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Kieran.